Yes, everyone. Hello, Mr. and Ms. I'm Tommy. Thank you for watching our videos. Well, this time for therapists and trainers, I would like to introduce one-point advice that can be used in the treatment. Today's theme is for rib flare customers. What kind of approach do you want to set up? I would like to dig deeper. So let's get started. Have you ever heard of Mr. Ms. a rib flare? The ribs are the ribs, and the belly flare is a word that means to spread. In other words, a rib flare is a term that refers to a condition in which the ribs are widened. Strictly speaking, it's the lower part of the septum of the ribs. This septum is open to more than 90 degrees. It's also called a rib flare. I think there are a lot of people today who have this rib flare, especially those who are hunched over but have a warped waist. I think there are a lot of cases where it becomes a rib flare. Today we're going to talk about the principle of rib flare and how therapists can approach it. I would like to introduce you. This condition called rib flare has two main disadvantages. The first is that you can't use your diaphragm properly. Essentially, the diaphragm is located in the plane of the ribs. The transverse diaphragm, which is dome-shaped on the plane of the ribs, causes vertical and vertical motion. Your lungs move and you breathe. However, if the rib flare condition is a state where the septum part of the ribs expands, the entire diaphragm is pulled laterally, which reduces the width of the vertical motion. Does this have an image? If the inner diameter of the ribs, the so-called inner part, is narrowed, the transverse diaphragm can move vertically. However, if this inner diameter of the ribs expands, the transverse diaphragm will be pulled sideways. The movement in the vertical direction is smaller. As a result, the so-called sub-breathing method is difficult to do, and breathing tends to be shallow. This is one of the disadvantages of rib flares, which reduces breathing efficiency by making it difficult to use the diaphragm. Another disadvantage is that it disrupts posture. I'll come back to that later. A rib flare is a condition in which the lower jaw of the ribs is very large and widened. This brings the upper body to the back tilt and leads to a tendency to warp the hips. This posture is also known as sway back. The sway back is the upper body behind the lower body. It refers to a posture that is in a slouching posture. This sway back posture is a state called hunched back and hunchback. It is not a very good posture for the human body structure. Disturbed posture makes it easier for problems to occur in various places. This diaphragm becomes difficult to use and posture is disturbed. You can also think of the factors that create these as rib flares. How to improve rib flare is a question that has become very important for modern people. The factors that cause this rib flare can be largely divided into three. The first one is that the front side of the rib cage widens. If you change the wording, this means the back side is being pulled in the ribs, which grow from the spine to the front. If the front side of these forward-facing ribs widen, this means the back side is compressed. If the muscles attached to the back of the ribs become stiff, it is easy for a state of rib flare to occur. Specifically, it happens with the longissimus, the muscle furthest outside the erectus spinae, and the lower lumbar muscles that are pulling at the back of the ribs, right? When the muscles on the back and lower part of the rib cage become stiff, the ribs inevitably get pulled backward, which causes the front to open. So as physiotherapists, what we can do is, it is important to properly loosen the back part. Following that, the second cause is the chest part of the spine, known as the thoracic spine, can become stiff. Especially the movement of the thoracic spine, the movement to arch the chest becomes stiff. Instead of the chest arching, the body tries to lift the ribs and tends to move backward. You can think of this as a large or small extension movement of the thoracic spine. You can think of it as rib flare from lifting the ribs due to the chest being stiff and hard to bend. So to put it simply, if you increase the range of motion of the thoracic spine area, there's no longer a need to flare the ribs. Thus, the rib flare is more likely to improve. It's very hard to loosen the spine. It's quite difficult to soften the spine through surgical approaches. However, by continuously moving it every day, the range of motion in the direction of progress will gradually extend. Are you familiar with the yoga poses called cat and dog? The cat pose is the movement of extensively rounding your back. The dog pose is the movement of greatly arching your back by rounding and arching your spine on a daily basis. Gradually, the spine becomes more supple and the range of motion expands. Unfortunately, modern humans lack scenes where the spine is greatly moved, especially those who do a lot of desk work have a very stiff spine with a limited range of motion. It's theorized that rib flare happens as a compensatory movement due to this stiffness of the spine. Therefore, I would advise you to incorporate movements that move the spine in your daily life. And the third factor is weak muscles around the ribs. Essentially, this means that the strength of the abdominal muscles has decreased. This includes the rectus abdominis muscle, internal oblique muscle, and the external oblique muscle located in the abdominal area. By pulling the ribs, the rib part is closed. The weaker the abdominal muscles, the more the ribs expand. The reality is that the therapist cannot do anything about the muscle weakness of this group of abdominal muscles. To some extent, it's a training of the abdominal muscles, stabilization, and crunching movements that increase abdominal pressure. By doing such sit-ups on a regular basis, I think that this is an indispensable part of regaining the strength of the abdominal muscles. I hope you can give me some advice along with the cat and dog movement I mentioned earlier. In summary, a rib flare is a condition in which the lower part of the ribs expands. If the ribs are expanded, the inner diameter of the ribs will expand. The diaphragm becomes more difficult to move vertically, which in turn makes it harder for breathing to enter. It tends to be a posture called a slave pack, which is a combination of a hunched back and a hunched waist. In everyday life, there are not so many good benefits. Therefore, I would like to improve this condition as soon as possible. The principle of rib flare is that the back of the ribs becomes stiff. When the muscles in the back and hips become stiff, the ribs are pulled from behind. The front side expands. So, as therapists, we go to loosen the back of the ribs and the lower back. One way to approach it is to think about it. It's often said that if the spine, particularly the thoracic spine, is rigid, it can lead to rib flare. When it becomes difficult to extend the thoracic spine or puff out the chest, the ribs try to expand to open up the chest as a form of natural progression, so it's important to make your spine flexible. However, this isn't something that can be done with just a simple treatment. I recommend incorporating exercises that move the spine, like the cat and dog pose, into your daily routine. Another critical factor is the abdominal muscles. If these muscles are loose and your abdominal pressure is weak, your rib cage will naturally expand. Stabilization exercises can help increase abdominal pressure, or you can try crunches. Incorporating training that brings the ribs and pelvis closer together will help. Gradually, you can expect to see improvements in your posture. It's essential to convey this thought process to our customers and encourage them to work on improving their posture in the long term. I believe it would be beneficial to strive for postural improvements over a medium to long term. You can refer to the summary column for a more detailed treatment method. If you're interested, please check that out. That's all for today's video. Looking forward to the next one. As always, thank you for your request.